Another giant win for LSU as Blake Baker is staying put in Baton Rouge. We'll react to it. Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked On LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We are free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. And as always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. I don't think that's going to be a problem on this episode. It is Friday night. We had to go live because the news has just become official. Blake Baker is staying at LSU, remaining as the school's defensive coordinator. He passes on overtures from Memphis and Tulane to be part of Lane Kiffin's initial staff in Baton Rouge, make a push for a national championship, and yes, eventually a Power 4 head coaching job. This was certainly not an easy decision for Blake Baker, but I'll tell you what I know and kind of how it all got to this point. So thank you for being here with us, and thank you for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. So let's just start with what we know. Of course, the Tulane Green Wave played Friday night in the American Athletic Conference Championship game where they beat North Texas. Short time after that game, words started to leak out. I believe WDSU had it first, and then others followed. Chris Lowe, we at LouisianaSports.net were able to confirm as well on Friday night that Blake Baker was, in fact, going to stay with the Tigers. And then a short time after that, Lane Kiffin goes straight to his X account, and then the LSU football account on top of that. You can see there, if you're watching, Lane Kiffin noted at the bottom, sorry couldn't make it to Atlanta, but excited that I stayed to finish this all up. Coach Blake Baker going nowhere. What a really long, amazing Friday for LSU football. And then, of course, the photo of Blake Baker there touching the win bar in Tiger Stadium. So Lane Kiffin confirming it. He did not go to Atlanta for the SEC Championship, where he was scheduled Saturday morning to be on College game day. Instead, stayed in Baton Rouge and got the deal done with Blake Baker to remain an LSU Tiger. So I'll kind of go through I think what we know and how it got to this point, because I think this is going to surprise a lot of people when they see this in particular, because on Thursday, a lot of the reports out there had been that it looked like Blake Baker was going to accept the Tulane job. So we'll kind of go back and play forward how this week went. And if you're an everydayer, shout out and thank you. You've probably heard me say this. But so on Monday, Baker had his initial interview with Tulane. On Wednesday, Garland Gillen, I believe, was the first to report that Memphis also interviewed Blake Baker for its vacant job. What we reported on my radio show after further review at LouisianaSports.net and here on Locked On LSU is that Thursday, both Memphis and Tulane came to Baton Rouge to visit Blake Baker. So Baker was not at football operations on Thursday, and he instead had these meetings, these one-on-one in-person meetings with both Tulane and Memphis. I was told Memphis took a big contingent, that they flew down to Baton Rouge to meet in person. I was also told that the offer that Memphis put forward was actually less than what Blake Baker's currently making. Now, Ryan Silverfield was making $2.4 million at Memphis. He took the head coaching job at Arkansas. I was told that the offer that Blake Baker got from Memphis was actually a smidge under $2 million. Now, I'm sure that was an initial offer, and there's negotiation, and the number probably went higher. But I think that was probably an easy one to dismiss, even if Memphis was trying to sell things that that might be more appealing to Blake Baker on a personal level. The money has to make sense if you're going to pack up and leave for an opportunity. Tulane, remember, was paying John Sumrall $3 million per year. Sumrall left for Florida, where he's making $7.5 million per year. So Tulane's offer, as I understand, was closer to what Sumrall made, maybe even a little more than $3. So LSU, all throughout this week, it was my understanding, was going to be competitive and come close to, if not match, what Tulane offered. So Blake Baker was making $2.5 million this past year. And part of the the hiring of Lane Kiffin, what this has done, the infusion of excitement, not only in the fan base, it's also happened that way with the boosters. So you've seen LSU's boosters and benefactors willing to step up and pay for this support staff, and so many other ways that they're injecting resources into this football program right now. So LSU is effectively trying to make the money a wash with Blake Baker. It was either going to be, do you want to go be a power, or do you want to go be a head coach now? Or are you just ready to go be a head coach? And it's your alma mater, and it's just down the road in New Orleans where he played collegiately. Or do you want to come back to LSU and have an opportunity to win a national championship where, listen, Blake Baker was frustrated this year. I don't think that's any deep secret, right? This offense in 2025 was arguably the worst offense in the history of LSU football. I mean, you were 108th in the country in scoring. I mean, even the Les Miles offenses that struggled, they really struggled to throw the ball, but they still had an identity and ran the ball and moved the football. This was just ineffective all the way around. And even when they played great, holding Alabama to 20 on the road, or holding Oklahoma under 20 in Norman, Oklahoma, and losing those football games, I think was so mightily frustrating. Having to hold on to a 13-10 game against Western Kentucky. I think having Lane Kiffin coming in was certainly this major coup and a relief for Blake Baker, because everywhere Kiffin's gone, offense has followed. So I think knowing that next year he's going to have help and his defense isn't going to have to do it all alone, and there is going to be a chance to compete for the college football playoff and possibly win that evasive national championship. I think all of that was a big part of it. Now, as we kind of go through this chronology again, I'll remind you. So Baker had these in-person meetings with both Tulane and Memphis on Thursday. Friday, Blake Baker was back in football ops. Now, the interesting part is because Thursday, all of the reports started coming out of New Orleans that Baker was likely to accept the job. And maybe this is just a little peek behind the curtain, a little inside baseball, but it's very clear all of the reports that were coming out about Baker potentially taking or likely to take the job were New Orleans media. And I don't mean for any way this to be disparaging. I think there's so many people that do a wonderful job, but it was very clear that information was coming from Tulane. And I believe Tulane felt very confident in their opportunity to get Blake Baker. I was not quite as aggressive in pushing that narrative. I certainly thought there was a really strong possibility that Baker could take the job. But there's a few reasons why I didn't really push very hard on that narrative. Number one, go back to Tuesday. Lane Kiffin gets hired on Sunday. They have staff meetings. On Tuesday, the night before signing day, and I've shared this with you, but that's when we learned that Richard Anderson and Lamar Brown may hold off on signing. Well, Tuesday night, there was a 3-hour meeting at LSU football ops. It was Lane Kiffin, Billy Glasscock, the GM, Richard Anderson's head coach, Bryce Brown, Richard Anderson's agent, representative, and Blake Baker. If Baker, who remember on Monday had his initial meeting with Tulane, if Baker had that initial meeting with Tulane on Monday, why would he be if he was taking that job, why would he be in a 3-hour meeting on Tuesday about Richard Anderson trying to convince him to come? Again, that's circumstantial evidence, but it's one thing. I can tell you also that throughout the course of this week, I did have a lot of phone calls with some of the recruits that I know that are members of this class and recruits' parents. And Blake Baker was telling people he was staying. Now, my feeling was at that point, he probably didn't yet have a formal offer. Monday, Tuesday, he probably didn't yet have a formal offer from Tulane, at least not that I'm aware of. So maybe in his mind, he didn't have the opportunity yet to say yes to Tulane. So he was assuming he was going to be back. Lane Kiffin had committed to keeping Blake Baker and bringing him back. So I think that was probably right. But you have this Tuesday night meeting with Blake Baker in it. Recruits and their families were saying he was coming back. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I did have correspondence with Blake Baker on Thursday. It was brief and it wasn't super detailed, but it was certainly a comment where he reached out to me, and it was certainly a guy that was very torn. I'm going to keep private what he said to me, and it wasn't long or super detailed, but it was very obvious that a decision Thursday night had not been made. Like Blake, so all those reports were coming out that he was accepting the job, and it was very clear Thursday night. So if you heard my radio show after further review on Friday, I mentioned that Baker had not made a decision as of Thursday night, and Friday he was at football ops. So I could understand how he could get to that point where he was going to have to make a decision after the AAC championship game, either Friday night or Saturday morning, because Tulane needed to make an announcement. Remember, the other candidate that was really in the mix there was Billy Napier, and Napier took the bird in hand at JMU. So you could read some tea leaves there to assume the other part of this as well, that maybe Baker was taking the job because the other primary candidate was off the board. Neil Brown was another candidate they were interested who took the job at North Texas. So there was a lot there that pointed to it, but the other part of it was there as well. It's also worth noting, and I think this is something that so many people don't consider, and it's the family consideration. Remember, Blake and his wife are married. They have young children. Their oldest is 10 years old. And they just moved 2 years ago from, after being in Baton Rouge for a year. Remember, they were in Miami. He came from Miami to Baton Rouge. They were for 1 year. Ed Ogeron gets fired. Blake's not retained. He goes to Missouri. They're there for 2 years. They move back to Baton Rouge for 2 years, then going to move again. Like, that's a lot on a family. And especially when you have young children. And so if you're Baker, maybe part of his thinking is, he's in Miami in 2020, Baton Rouge in 2021, Columbia, Missouri in 22, 23, Baton Rouge 24, 25, going to go to New Orleans for a year or two, and then get another, hopefully, springboard opportunity. I mean, like Willie Fritz did, John Summerall was the head coach of Tulane for 2 years and got his Power 4 opportunity. So, like, if you're Baker, are you thinking you want to go to Miami to Baton Rouge to Columbia to Baton Rouge to New Orleans to another job? 6 moves in less than a decade? That's a lot on a young family. And I am certain that had something to do with it, because Blake, you have to be a genius to see this, man. Like, Blake, every post game, Blake Baker's children are on the field with him and his wife and the players. And it's always the players on the team playing with Blake Baker's kids on the field post game, and his kids are around all the time. Like, that matters to him a lot, and it's naive not to believe that played a role in this as well. So when you line up all the things, like, man, LSU, I don't know the numbers. I have not yet gotten the numbers confirmed. I'm working on that for his contract, but it is safe to assume he was making 2.5, that LSU is going to go to 3 or north of it. So you can get paid that way. You can stay in Baton Rouge. There are so many examples of coaches that have gone the Power 4 coordinator route to a major head coaching job. I've shared them with you a million times, man. Kirby Smart went from Bama to Georgia. Dan Lanning went from Georgia to Oregon. Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. Ryan Day at Ohio State. Sharon Moore at Michigan. Brent Venables at Oklahoma. Before him, Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. Before him, Bob Stoops at Oklahoma. The point being, Dave Aranda did it from Baton Rouge to Baylor. The point is, you can go from being Power 4 coordinator to Power 4 head coach, major Power 4 head coach. And, maybe Baker having, the salary in place, more stability in Baton Rouge with his family, getting complimentary football from the offense with Kiffin being here, a chance to compete for a championship, all those things mixed in, I think are ultimately what led him to this decision. And I heard, someone who I think is really smart shared this advice with me. And this is someone who I would say is, a super successful person, not a coach, not someone in the sports world, but someone who's a very successful business person, like private jet type business person, told me one time that the worst decisions that this person's ever made in their life were the hardest ones. If you agonize over a decision, it's probably a bad decision. The best decisions are the easiest ones. So if Blake Baker was agonizing over leaving Baton Rouge, the answer probably is, man, stay in Baton. Like, because if in 2 years, if in 2 years that power program comes, if in 2 years Texas comes call, I don't know what's going to happen with Sark. I'm just throwing out if in 2 years Southern Cal comes calling or whatever it may be, that's an easy answer, man. You take that job, right? This is the one where you had to wrangle with it. And I think it led him to the point where he's staying. And it's a huge win for LSU. So what's the windfall of all of this now? Okay, what's the fallout of Baker staying? Let's dive into that here as we continue. Let me knock out some elements that I have to do, and we'll continue. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play, suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, defense tightens up, momentum flips after a turnover, and FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. Live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. You can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. And we're brought to you by Aura Frames. The holidays are officially here, which means gift hunting season is on. And if you want something meaningful, personal, and guaranteed to get a reaction, Aura Frames is the gift that delivers every time. It's not just something you wrap. It's a way to share memories because Aura isn't your average picture frame. You can preload the frame with photos before gifting it. So when they plug it in, the memories are already there. No apps to figure out. No setup headaches, just instant smiles. Perfect for grandparents, parents, newlyweds, anyone who loves photos, and endless uploads of pictures and 30-second videos throughout the Aura app. Packaging comes gift ready, no price tag, no wrapping needed, so it's a huge win. And for a limited time, save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver mat frames, named number 1 by Wirecutter, when you use the promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That's auraframes.com, promo code COLLEGE. This deal is exclusive to listeners. Frames sell out fast, so order yours now to get it in time for the holidays. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. So Blake Baker staying at LSU, a major win. I can spell this out for you if you really need me to, but we remember the 2023 defense, okay? LSU had its worst defense in the history of the program. The Tigers that year were 81st in the country in scoring. This year, in year 2 under Blake Baker, they were 15th in scoring defense, 25th in total defense. They were the top SEC defense in the red zone this season, and they finished 7th in the country in interceptions. So you're talking about a guy that was a defensive coordinator in Miami, came to Baton Rouge as the linebackers coach, went to Missouri for 2 years, took over a terrible defense at Mizzou, turned it around in 2 seasons, and now has done the same at LSU. That is significant because, number one, Blake Baker is really good at his job. The other thing that I think is so important about maintaining Blake Baker on staff is, look, if Blake Baker had left, your defensive staff was going to be gutted. Okay? You're already having total turnover offensively. And by the way, that's probably a good thing, right? I mean, your offense was awful this year, but Lane Kiffin's coming in. He's bringing with him his co-OCs, Charlie Weiss Jr. and Joe Cox, his wide receiver coach, George McDonald. I do believe that his running backs coach, Kevin Smith, eventually is going to join him in Baton Rouge, even if Smith is going to coach Ole Miss throughout the playoff. That has not been determined as of this point, but it sure sounds like a lot of the information I have is pointing toward Kevin Smith joining Kiffin in Baton Rouge, which means there's a giant question around Frank Wilson, as we all well know. You're going to add an offensive line coach. They did earlier this week bring. Forgive me, y'all. I need to get the names correct as best I can. But they did add an offensive line coach this week to the staff, who last year was at Kentucky, last 2 seasons was at Kentucky, and I'm blanking on his name. Eric Wolford, excuse me, who spent the last 30 year in coaching, the last 9 seasons as an SEC offensive line coach at South Carolina, Alabama, Kentucky. So, but again, I do not know if Wolford's going to be the offensive line coach or if he's an analyst or whatever, or support staff member. But point is, you're going to add an offensive line coach as well. All that to say, you're having massive turnover on the offensive side, coaching wise. Defensively, the hope was, of course, with Pete Golding getting the head coaching job at Ole Miss, that and the whole defensive staff stayed there in Oxford. The hope was you keep Blake Baker, you keep the defensive staff largely in place as well. So had Blake Baker left, he was going to take with him Kevin Peoples and Jake Olson. Remember, those 2 guys were part of the defensive staff at Missouri under Blake Baker. So Baker bringing those guys to Baton Rouge was certainly going to bring them with him, and likely, I don't know if one of them would have been the defensive coordinator. I'm certain, if not co-DCs, whatever. But also, there's 2 analysts that work with Blake. Jake Witt and Noah Joseph are 2 defensive analysts that work under Blake Baker that likely would have had on-field opportunities with Baker if he had gone to Tulane. So my point is, your defensive staff would have been gutted. You would have lost Baker, who coaches your linebackers. Kyle Williams, I think it's pretty clear we all know now, isn't going to be back. You would have lost Peoples, who's your edge coach. You would have lost Olson, who's your safeties coach. Meaning the only defensive coach that would have been returning was Corey Raymond. And I do feel at this point like Corey Raymond is safe based on every conversation I've had with people currently on the staff in athletic administration. I've not spoken to Lane Kiffin, to be very clear. He and I have not had a conversation. The only time I've spoken to him since he's gotten the job is the question I asked in his introductory press conference. So this is not from Lane Kiffin, but also the conversations that recruits and their parents have had. I do believe Corey Raymond is going to be back at LSU. I think a really good indicator there was Haven Finney, right? Haven Finney, who is the number 1 cornerback in the country for 2027, the 5-star out of LA, who reclassed to 2026. Haven Finney Sr. was a guest on After Further Review when his son committed, and all but said this is a Corey Raymond play. Like, if Corey isn't there, this probably doesn't happen. So it's a really good indicator that they feel like Corey is going to be back. So all that to say, if Baker had left, Corey Raymond is likely your only defensive staff member that was going to stay. So I think keeping Baker to coach linebackers, keeping Peoples to coach your edges, keeping Olson to coach your safeties, which your safety play the last 2 years has improved dramatically from what it was 2 years ago in 23, even to what they inherited last year to Olson to what it was this year, the dramatic improvement with Halsey and Cooley and Deshaun Spears taking a big step forward this year as well and getting more out of Toviano. Like, I think everything sort of elevated. And remember also, a giant part of this class, this signing class, this early signing period, is you just inked arguably the best defensive line class ever. I mean, I'm not into hyperbole. I'm not the guy that's going to sit here and tell you this is the greatest that or the worst that in history. But for the first time in LSU's recruiting history, signed the number 1 overall prospect in the country in the composite in Lamar Brown. He's an end. He's going to play edge at LSU. You signed the number 1 defensive tackle in the country, Richard Anderson. You signed the number 3 defensive tackle in the country in Deuce Geralds. You signed a top 100 player, the number 1 edge out of Florida, in Trenton Henderson. I mean, that's really hard to do if your defensive coordinator is gone, who's taking with him your edge coach, and you're replacing your defensive tackles coach. So that stability, I think, is a big part of why this week went the way that it did in the recruiting class as well. So Blake Baker staying put. And the other thing I'll tell you, in preparing for the possibility of Blake Baker taking the Tulane job, I started to ask around about who the names were going to be. Now, thankfully, we can crumple this list up and throw it away and hopefully never have to bring it up again. Or, or in a year, 2 years, whenever Blake Baker does get a major head coaching job, it's a different conversation. But the names that I was told that would have been kind of on a short list, Vince Cares would have been one. He's the defensive coordinator at Toledo. Now, it's a fascinating guy because he was the head coach at Mount Union, the Division III school. He was like 95-6 as the head coach at Mount Union. Won a couple of Division III national titles. Went to Tulane, went to Toledo, where he's been for 6 years, their defensive coordinator, but hasn't gotten a look anywhere else, which is surprising. But he's dramatically improved their defense. Scotty Hazelton, who's the defensive coordinator at Wake Forest right now, that's another one that was mentioned. Jim Knowles, who's unemployed. He was at Penn State after James Franklin got fired. He still doesn't have a job. I actually had someone mention to me the possibility of Will Muschamp coming back to LSU as a defensive coordinator. And then Glenn Schumann was the other. He's the DC at Georgia, who I think a lot of people could get really excited about that. And you might say, well, why would Glenn Schumann leave Georgia? Well, it's kind of a spread your wings, have an opportunity to run your own defense, maybe, with because everyone just assumes Georgia's defense is Kirby. And so this similar to like Charlie Weiss under Lane Kiffin, everyone just assumes it's Lane's offense, which it is. Everyone looks at Georgia and says, well, that's Kirby's defense, which it is. So maybe an opportunity for Schumann to spread his wings. But like, that's the list that we were kind of talking about. You know, Lance Guidry, who's on staff presently, had been a DC at Miami, been the head coach at McNeese. Like, that might have been an opportunity as well. And there was even like a distant possibility thought that I heard whispered about the possibility of Chris Kiffin, Lane's brother, maybe even assuming an on-field role and coach linebackers, DC, co-DC type thing. So they're working through a lot of this. But all that to say, think about what I just described for you and understand why keeping Blake Baker and that stability is so important, because you're going to retain more of your roster defensively. You got this class signed now, keeping all the guys you wanted, and you're going to keep stability within the coaching staff, the terminology, all that stuff as well. So massive, massive, massive win for LSU all this week. From Sunday, Lane Kiffin accepting the LSU job, coming to Baton Rouge. Monday, obviously being introduced, and all that's happened throughout the course of this week, adding support staff, polishing off one of the best recruiting classes in LSU history by average rating. LSU, by the way, they only signed 14 guys, so the class is ranked 11th. But if you go by average rating of the player, like the average rating of your signees, LSU got the number one class in the country, ahead of Oregon now. So it was a quality over quantity thing. I've shared this with you before if you're an everyday or you've heard it, but this is what Lane Kiffin said on Monday about his signing class.
We have big picture thinking too. So we're not reaching or we're not signing kids because they're from this school or that school or any of that stuff. Okay? We're going to sign the best players that we can on Wednesday, then go to the portal, which I have.
He went on to talk about how excited he is about the portal, but think about what he said. We're not reaching. We're not signing kids just because they're from this school, that school. We're going to sign the best players we can. So you sign 14, and it's the highest rated class in the country. So, and now you keep Blake Baker, keep your defensive staff in place as well. What an incredible week for LSU. And we're here for it on Locked On LSU. Friday night, we had to go live to talk about this massive news with Blake Baker. I'm not sure where Tulane turns next. To be perfectly honest with you, I don't really care, because this isn't Locked On Tulane, it's Locked On LSU. And LSU's arrow is pointing up tremendously right now. So much energy and juice around the program, which is fantastic to see. So as it continues to roll along, we'll be here every single day. Hey, do me a favor, if you're watching on YouTube, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for being with us here live on this Friday night. If you're catching us on podcast, thank you for being there. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app, rate us, leave a review, and thanks for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. Be sure to let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day. It's Locked On LSU, your team every day.